Yes, team. Welcome to another episode of the Jake O'Connor, the High Functioning Addiction podcast. Today, I've got a very, very special guest. Um, it's a gentleman called Dan Martin. First of all, Dan, I just want to say a huge welcome to the podcast, mate.
Thank you. Good to be here, man.
For the people that haven't heard of you or haven't seen your work, who are you and what do you do?
Loaded question. Where do I go with that? I do a few different things. I think a lot of people would maybe know me from what I have done in the past because it's changed relatively recently. So if I just go back to where I came from and then bring us forward to where we are here, before retraining in the same discipline that you have, which is cognitive hypnotherapy, I worked in sales for the best part of 9 years, starting in recruitment and going into financial services and later going into software. And then the lockdown came along and forced me to challenge the way that I was living my life. So I found therapy, realized that, I wanted to go and do something a little bit more meaningful. So I trained in therapy. And then upon qualifying in 2022, did two things: launched my own addiction therapy business alongside joining Total Mental Performance, which is where our paths crossed, and since then have gone on to move into the area of business coaching and mentoring. But a lot of the work I do now still blends a lot of that internal work aspect of what it takes to grow a business, which I'm sure you've experienced personally firsthand. It's as much about who we become in the process of growing a business as it is about learning all of the tools and tricks that actually bring a business together. So it's been an interesting journey, but I'm very grateful to be in the position that I am right now, having met, inspiring and cool people like yourself.
Yeah, and for the people that don't know, Dan was actually my hypnotherapist, and you were the first guy that I ever actually reached out to. Really, I remember the process, and it was so this was at the time when Dan was working in addiction coaching and therapy, and I remember messaging my fitness coach at the time. And I said to him, "Do you know any mindset coaches? I'd just come back from traveling, and I had this mindset coach in my head. I think I was listening to like some podcasts or something." And he said, "Well, not really, but I know this one company," and obviously it was TMP. And obviously I spoke to Kieran and stuff like that, which is the founder of Total Mental Performance, and we jumped on a call, and the rest is history. Like from that first call, I remember turning up with my notepad and pen and ready to take notes, and then my internal world got shredded, got torn apart. It was so needed. I mean, I know we didn't specifically directly work on the addiction stuff, but obviously, as you and I both know, it's all kind of layered and kind of intertwined anyway, right? But for the people that are listening, really, like, how do you remember me when I first turned up to my first session or to the first call? Yeah, I'm curious.
And summarize that in a word.
Go on.
One word. Can you guess what it is? I'm going to put the ball in your court and see if you can guess what it is.
I reckon I know this isn't the question, but I two come to mind. The first one is eager, and the second one is, I think I'd say nervous. I was a bit nervous, I think. By the look on your face, I don't know if it was the answer. No.
Nah, nah. I mean, they're somewhat representative of the word that I've got in mind, but when I first met you, you were a boy, and now you're a
Mm,
man.
yeah. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. Yeah. And what represents, or what, like, how did I represent a boy, do you think?
Well, I think, this phrase, with age comes wisdom. There's some truth to that, although I think wisdom is about much more than living through a number of years on Earth. Wisdom, to me, is having the ability to consider the second or third degree consequences of your actions, and you only figure that out through going out and making a series of mistakes so that you can understand what you should and should not do the next time around. And how old are you when we first met? 23, something like that?
When
Yeah, 23. So I'm sure there are some very wise 23-year-olds out there in the world. I can't imagine there's an enormous amount of them. relative to people who are a little bit older. But the position that you were in at that point in time, you had originally trained as a carpenter or something like that, I believe, right? Yeah, so you originally trained as a carpenter, then you went to work in recruitment, and that is going to expose you to some life experience, but not that much. You can't be incredibly wise when you haven't been exposed to that much. So, not to say that you didn't have elements of wisdom. I think it takes an element of wisdom to raise your hand and go, actually, I need someone to go and dig around my mind to help me figure out who I want to become. That is a wise move. But you were a bit fresh around the ears. And I get what you're saying about that eagerness. Definitely eager. I mean, you're still eager to this day. You've not lost that. That's a key characteristic of what makes Jake Jake. Nervous? Yeah, I mean, that's understandable if you're going into a place where you've never been before and, exposing yourself to conversations that are probably going to challenge you, and it's likely where the nervousness was coming from. But there was just this sense of, fresh, a bit fresh around the ears and uncertain about what's next. Although that being said, the first conversation that I ever had with Kieran, who's the founder of Total Mental Performance, related to you, was where he showed a message that you'd sent to the company Instagram account saying, I want to become a mental performance coach. Is this something that you can help with? And, happy to go through the process and da-da-da-da-da. So there was a real sense of optimism about this little project that we had. It's like, yeah, this guy, he really wants it. This young, ambitious guy working in recruitment, bearing in mind that, Kieran and I had both gone through that same journey as well. So there's almost this father-son kind of dynamic where it's like, yeah, we can raise this guy, we can turn this boy into a man and create something really, really cool out of where he wants to go. And, we've been proven right with that because you have created what is a really beautiful life for yourself.
Yeah, it's so true. And I remember sending that message to Kieran, and I'd always message Kieran and just is there still a role available? Is there going to be an opportunity? And for context, Kieran did actually take me on as a full-time coach. And I remember sitting at dinner with Kieran one time, and we went to some business event in Birmingham, and I was calling myself Project Mbappe. I was calling myself the up and coming youthful coach, and I was definitely rough around the ears. I was very sensitive to criticism. And someone holding the mirror up, I'd actually get really, really defensive and have my guard up a bit, and I would kind of try and be like, well, say for example, you held the mirror up and said, oh, well, this is going on. I'd be like, well, no, it's because of bang, bang, bang. And I'd always try and prove where it came from. But actually now it's just accepting we are imperfect humans, right? And no one human is perfect, and there is always going to be rough edges and ultimately flaws in our personality, but that's who makes us, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Intellectualization or justification for things is something that I'm sure you see in your clients now when you first start working with people. Before the gap between the mind and the body has been bridged, the mind will automatically try and default to a rationalization or a reason for things being that way, when unfortunately emotions, as you know, are inherently chaotic and volatile, and it's not always easy to straighten it out with a thought process or something like that. Acceptance really is the answer, but it's hard to see that when you haven't got any evidence of that being true, right?
So true. I think your story is so important too, right? Your background. You can go into as much detail as you want, really, but everyone listening will know my story, right? But I think it's so important for people to also hear yours too. So if you're happy to share, where did this journey begin for you?
The therapy journey, well, it began realistically the day I was born, because I was adopted at a very young age. 3 months old was how old I was when my adopted parents scooped me up and took me into their home and called me their son. And when I was growing up, I think the first time I realized what it meant to be adopted was when I was 6 or 7 years old. I got this vivid memory of being in the back garden on a hot summer's day when my mum told me, and I just flipped my lid and saw red. And that was a theme throughout my whole childhood. Whenever I couldn't process the intensity of emotion that I was experiencing, I would just get angry. And I couldn't understand why that was. But, as children, especially boys, we're not really taught how to navigate our internal world. So I just assumed that that was normal to get that angry. But the reason that's relevant is because the misunderstanding of what it meant to be adopted caused me to form a series of, firstly, emotions, such as like shame and anger, like I said a moment ago, and just like frustration. Why me was this question that I used to have floating around my mind all the time. Why has this happened to me? But then as I, started training in therapy and studying psychology and understanding more about why humans are the way they are, I understood the importance of beliefs. Essentially the lens through which we see the outside world, but also our internal world. And the belief that I had internalized as being true was that I am not worthy. Specifically, I'm not worthy of love from my birth parents. Now, I can look back on that and rationalize that that is just not true, because people don't give their baby up for adoption without a valid reason most of the time, unless there's as I'm sure you've heard stories of, if you've got a mother who's maybe addicted to something whilst they're carrying a baby, then social services might get involved and they're forced to give their child up for adoption, which can happen. That wasn't the case for me. My birth parents, gave me up for adoption because they were too young. So they just didn't have the financial means to support a baby. So looking back on that, perfectly reasonable. But in my infantile mind, where, I was processing the world through a very binary lens of good, bad, love, hate, etc., I just internalized this idea that, well, it must be my fault. I must be the problem. That's why I've been put up for adoption. And so that then became the foundation of who I was as a person. So, as you said, addiction was a big part of my life as well from a very, very young age. I can remember the first thing I ever became addicted to was setting fire to shit, like pyromania. Like that was the first thing that I was addicted to. Like, I remember I was expelled on one of the last days of year 6 in primary school because I was setting fire to toilet paper in the toilets, because I just loved it. The thrill of burning things was addictive. It was the first introduction to, that intense spike in dopamine, and it came through fire. But then, that went on to cigarettes, then went on to drinking, then I went on to cocaine. That was my drug of choice, cocaine, and then weed and various other things as well. And that went on up until, I don't know what age I would have been. I think it maybe would have been the same sort of age that I met you, 23, 24, something like that. Whenever the lockdown came along, which was 2020 originally, as I alluded to when I introduced myself at the beginning of the podcast. That all came to a head when I was no longer able to go out and, get drugs or party with friends and live that lifestyle that I thought was okay. So it brought all of that repressed shame and guilt and frustration and anger and those beliefs as not being worthy and not being good enough. All of that was brought up to the surface, and I just didn't know what to do with it because I'd never really explored that side of myself before. And I can recall having this, what felt like intense ball of energy that was stuck in my stomach. And it was only after the lockdown came along where I was forced to acknowledge that feeling that I was aware that it was there. But it's one of those things, you might experience this, we're until you don't know. But it was always there. It was only that I didn't have the space in my life to actually sit with it and acknowledge what was really going on. So I couldn't ignore it anymore. And over the course of 12 to 18 months, there or thereabouts, I slowly fell into what I can now recognize as being depression, where I couldn't, get out of bed. I didn't want to do anything. I didn't want to see anyone. I couldn't eat that well. Really, really struggling. And after a conversation with a close friend of mine who said, you really should go and speak to someone about this and actually start doing something about this. Start working with a therapist, and after starting to piece together everything that was going on in my life, I saw that there was the connection between that adoption as the first point in my traumatic past, contributing to why I was addicted to so many different things. Because the way that I'd internalized this was, well, if I don't believe that I'm worthy of love and I don't believe that I'm good enough, why does it matter if I go out and get fucked up? Why does it matter if I don't, apply myself as much as I could in my career? Why does it matter if I'm not where my friends are? Because at the end of the day, I'm always going to be unworthy. So who cares? Right? That was the justification that was running unconsciously in the back of my mind. Now, that was one part of the journey. So resolving the adoption stuff was really the main catalyst between me realizing that, drinking alcohol and going out and get fucked up, that wasn't serving me at all. So resolving that was crucial in the journey of me becoming the person who I am today. But then there's another part of it, which was a much later part of my healing journey last year, when it all kind of came to the point of conclusion, which was that I also lost my adopted mum to cancer when I was 19 years old. Very aggressive cancer. She had it in the womb initially. She had her womb removed after about 6 months or so, and then 4 months after that, it very aggressively spread to her brain, at which point she died quite suddenly. So it was a really short and intense period of her becoming very ill and then unfortunately dying. That was when I was age 19. I was still very much addicted and in that lifestyle when I was age 19. And again, didn't know how to process the emotion. I felt it, but I didn't know how to process it. So all of that intense grief that I felt as a result of her dying didn't move through me. And there's this phrase that I absolutely love, which is unprocessed emotion is buried alive. Meaning, if you do not process emotion, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just buried and stored at a very deep somatic level within your body. And that happened to me with that grief. And it wasn't until Christmas 2023 that I actually processed that grief. So that's, 10 years down the line? And believe it or not, in those 10 years, I didn't cry once. And that is just an indication of that unprocessed emotion being buried, right? Yes, I felt a lot of pain because I'd been through that therapy journey of healing all the adoption stuff, but I hadn't cried. And I felt like there was something broken inside of me, but it was actually because I hadn't processed that grief, because I didn't know how. And I think this is the distinction that I now understand. There's a very big difference between understanding something, as in intellectualizing it with your mind, thinking something through, and feeling it at a very deep level. They're two very different things. And I didn't realize that until I'd actually experienced it. I'd trained in different forms of somatic therapy, but until I'd felt what it was like to release 10 years worth of stored and stuck grief, I hadn't appreciated what that was actually like. So midway through last year was the first point that I felt really, truly aligned with who I actually was, because I'd finally integrated all of those big moments that had happened at some point in the past for me.
Well, that's a very powerful story, mate. And I'm sure a lot of people can resonate with the unprocessed trauma, right? Because essentially that's what an addiction is. It's just suppressing the emotions that one experiences, right? Like in other ways, whether it's drugs, drink, whatever. And there's this huge disconnect between feeling the emotions, because whenever someone going through an addiction feels an emotion, as soon as they feel it, they reach for the drink or they reach for the drug or whatever, right? And I'm sure that's what happened in your life, and that definitely happened in mine too. When did you actually realize, so I know you kind of mentioned your story and your journey a little bit, but what was the tipping point where you realized, right, something needs to change here? Was it that feeling that you had in your stomach that you kind of knew there was something off, or did a big event happen in your life where, I don't know, you had a breakup or whatever? What was the point where you knew, right, something needs to change and I need to reach out?
There were several. I have got what I get in the addiction community. We hear about rock bottom quite a lot, right? And we're almost expected to have a rock bottom moment. And I think that it's not that simple. I don't think everybody has. My experience working with a lot of these folks over the years, not everybody has a rock bottom. Oh my God, this is what I need to do. There were several different moments that led me to the realization that something wasn't right in my life. When was the first one? The first trigger event was when I decided to move to Wales. Trying to think about timelines here. The year where we had the first lockdowns, when the summer was great, it was beautiful weather. I was living in Hitchin at that point in time, which is like just outside of Hertfordshire, southern England, and I was in so much debt, credit card debt, because of the lifestyle that I was living, like 25 grand worth of credit card debt, and I had all of the pointless stuff that I didn't need, like expensive watches. I had a car which was costing me £550 a month. I was living in this flat which I couldn't afford, and it was the first time in my life that I'd actually realised I couldn't sustain the lifestyle at material levels. I'm not even talking about emotions at this point. Just like materially, I could not afford the life that I was living. So I had to go leave the flat that I was renting, go back to live with my dad for a little while, because it was around the lockdown period of time. My dad and I had these very conflicting ideas on COVID. Like I felt like something wasn't quite right with the lockdowns, and he was like, no, you need to go and do this. And we was just clashing all the time. I was like, fuck, I can't live here, but I can't afford to live in my own place. What do I do? So I had a look on Spare Room, which is, a website where you just rent a room. I thought, do I want to do that? I feel like I'm going backwards after having my own place for the first time, and now I'm realizing that I can't afford it. What do I do? And I realized that actually I had to get out of that house, because I was just going to end up fighting with my dad, which is definitely not what I wanted to do. So I found this remote barn in the middle of Wales, like really in the middle of nowhere. And my thought process was, well, I know that I need to do something about the lifestyle that I'm living. I now can't go and live in the same way that I was, because my friends aren't here, or, the finances couldn't support it, and clubs aren't open, and all that sort of shit. So I thought, well, what do I love doing? I love mountain biking. How can I do as much mountain biking as possible? Well, I'll go to Wales. That's where the best mountain biking in the country is. As an upside of that, I'll also get away from all of this kind of stuff, and I can start to, think about what I want to do and where I want to go. So I moved to Wales, thinking that was going to be a bit of a get out of jail free card, and I'd just sort my shit out and everything would be great. And it was, in a way, like I'd started to focus on myself a bit more. It was the first time I'd ever sat down consistently and written down goals. Never was able to do that before. But I was introduced to a book which you've probably read, called The Drummer and the Great Mountain, and that book genuinely did change my life in many ways, because it just forced me to think about who I was, why I was the way I was, where I was going, etc. So I lived in Wales for the best part of nine months. But another little bump in the road was that whilst I was there was this dude who did a lot of maintenance work on this old property, and I still hadn't shifted all of the addictive behaviours that I was struggling with, specifically weed. I wasn't doing any coke at this point. I was still drinking here and there, but I was still smoking a lot of weed. And I thought, well, I'm living in the middle of nowhere. Wouldn't it be cool to grow some weed? That'd be a fun thing to do. And I got quite friendly with this guy who did a lot of the maintenance work on the property. And I said this to him. I was like, I'm thinking about growing some weed. Like, I've spoken to the landlord. And he said, well, if I don't know about it, wink, wink, then it's okay, kind of thing. And this maintenance dude was like, funny you should say that. Come with me. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, walk me out up the driveway, this barn on the right-hand side. So you had the main house and you had two barns on either side. Up the driveway, into the barn on the right, upstairs, and I could hear this extractor fan. I know what's going on here. And he opens up this room, and he's already got a grow. So he's got 4 plants, which he's just about to harvest in this room. And that addictive tendency, which transcends just substances a lot of the time, was then activated in a slightly different way. Where you find something you love and you're like, oh God, I've just got to do more of this, right? So I just became hooked on learning more about how to grow wheat. Long story short, we did one harvest and never intended to sell it, just enjoying the process of nurturing plants. It was quite a wholesome thing to do, actually, and watch them come to life and, harvest them, and it was good fun. But anyway, I got carried away with it. And I ended up buying another tent and full grow system. So my idea was to have this like factory process going on, where in one barn we'd have some plants which were just about to come to harvest, and then in the other barn we'd have some seedlings which we were just growing. So by the time the plants in the barn on the right were done, we could bring the other ones in and then have this system going, right? Great, cracked it. This is going to be fun. I'll have loads of weed to smoke. But that came to a head when the landlord's daughter came to visit one day. Bearing in mind, the landlord was in his 80s, His daughter was in her 40s and she'd grown up on this property, so she knew it like the back of her hand. She came to visit one day and she heard one of the extractor fans. I thought that I was really smart and had both keys for the barns, but she had spare keys. Of course, she found both of the grows, ended up calling the police. The police then came, raided everything, and I tried denying it for a little while, but eventually couldn't because, I was essentially holding a smoking gun, and I ended up getting arrested for cannabis cultivation. And that was a big trigger moment for me because what I thought was an opportunity for me to start figuring myself out had massively backfired, 100% due to my own decisions. But I then had to leave Wales very quickly. I went back to my dad's again. I thought, how have I ended up back here after thinking that I was going to be moving in the right direction? And I felt very sorry for myself at that point, but recognized that that was the kick up the arse that I needed from universe to actually sort my shit out. Because by this point, I'd actually started qualifying as a therapist. So the imposter syndrome was like nothing I'd ever experienced before, where on the one hand, I'm learning how to help people sort their life out and, heal their trauma and become a better version of themselves. On the other hand, I'd just been arrested for growing weed. So there's this total identity confusion going on where on the one hand, I'm moving in the direction that's going to carry me towards the life that I want to create. And on the other hand, I'm still degenerate. It was like this weird paradox that I was living through. But that moment where I was arrested was great because it was a slap around the face, right? It was, you've got something really good going on here. Stop fucking about. And so I went back to my dad's very briefly and then moved to where I still live to this day, which is Manchester. People ask me why Manchester. I honestly don't know. It felt like a spiritual home for me. I'd been there once before in my life. I didn't know it at all, but for whatever reason, I just felt cool to move to Manchester. So I did in October 2020 at this point. And then 2 months after moving here was when I would call the biggest rock bottom moment, which is again drug induced. I was microdosing LSD at the time, experimenting with different psychedelics and seeing if it would help me, focus more and retain more information or whatever. On this particular Wednesday, I didn't take a microdose. I took too much, and I was sat down at my desk about to start work at 8 o'clock in the morning, and the words on the screen started jumping out at me, and I thought, fuck, I'm in trouble. This is not the best way to start hump day in the middle of the week. And I went for a walk, I splashed some cold water on my face, but that was the moment where the old Dan was like collapsing, and the reality of what had just happened with the weed experience in Wales, along with another conversation which happened a couple of weeks before me moving to Manchester with my boss at the time, so still working in financial services. Bearing in mind, I just spent these 9 months in Wales starting to figure out who I was as a result of, no barbers being open. I had long hair. I wasn't training anymore. I was like visually a very different person, and emotionally and psychologically, I was changing a lot over that time. Had a return to work meeting with my boss, and he said, you went to Wales, one person, and now this guy who sat in front of me, I don't know who Dan is anymore. And those words were like another hammer to the very fragile identity that I was operating from. But again, I didn't really know how to process the emotion in that moment. But it didn't go anywhere. It was there. It was just stuck again. So going back to that experience where I macrodosed the LSD accidentally, there's a combination of identity collapse from the conversation that I had with my boss at the time, the weed experience where I hadn't acknowledged what had actually happened, and then a lot of other emotional stuff that often, gets wrapped up in moments that we have, all came up to the surface. And that's when the real work started. 2 weeks after that specific moment, I had a conversation with my therapist at the time, and he suggested taking a break, like an official reset period from alcohol specifically, because for me, everything else was connected to alcohol, but everything else that came with it, right? And I said, yeah, do you know what? Let's do it. What would you recommend? And he went, well, the minimum effective dose is 90 days. I went, let's do 12 months. I'm ready. I'm ready to do 12 months. He went, you sure? I went, yeah, let's do 12 months. And it was that conversation actually where everything changed, because I removed all of those distractions. Not to say that, it's the universal truth of growth for everyone. Everybody's different, but for listeners of your podcast, I would imagine that it's going to be quite relevant because most of the time, if you do remove the thing that is causing the distraction, in my case, alcohol and cocaine primarily, then it allows you to get into what the real problem is. And in my case, it was all of the stuff that I've spoken about already, like the adoption, the grief, and the identity confusion, and all of that kind of stuff. Could you get into that whilst still drinking and taking drugs? I doubt it, to be honest. I doubt it. So, yeah, that was the main moment. Main moments, more than one. A few little
Yeah.
bumps in the road, which then all came to a point of conclusion where I was like, oh, fuck, I can't do anything about it now. I've got to really do something about this.
Well, for someone, one of those events probably would have been the rock bottom, so to speak, but you had quite a few of them, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, you experienced many bumps in the road. And it's funny you say that in the recovery world, because I went on a podcast the other day and he said to me, what was your rock bottom moment? And I was like, there wasn't a macro rock bottom, so to speak. It was more micro, like this thing happened and then I pissed this person off and then this happened and this happened. And it was just this cumulative micro traumatic events that just pushed me over the edge, essentially. This reset process that obviously I'm aware of it, and my clients will be aware of it too that are listening. But essentially, for anyone that's listening, is committing to a set period of time, 30, 60, 90, in Dan's situation, 12 months, which is quite some commitment. Did you stick to that? Or did you ever kind of relapse in that 12 months, or was it a solid 12-month sprint of pure 100% sobriety and you really stuck to it?
It depends who you ask and who's defining sobriety. Looking back on it, probably wouldn't call it sobriety because I know that sobriety is a term that's associated primarily with the AA 12-step community. It's like a way of being. I wasn't in sobriety in that sense because I still took psychedelics every now and again, right? Never like to go out and get fucked up and go to a club. If I did take psychedelics, it would be mushrooms with one friend or sometimes even on my own, very infrequently, maybe 2 or 3 times a year, perhaps, to understand my internal world. Like it was intentional psychedelic use. So if you'd ask some people, they'd probably say that it's not a real reset process, bro. You didn't do it properly. But I knew that those weren't compounds that I personally would become addicted to. I'm sure some people would, but for me, it was the alcohol and the cocaine. So as far as those two things were concerned, yes. And I felt so good and I'd accomplished so much after 12 months that I kept going it was just under 3 years. By the point, it was August last year was when I decided to have a beer, drink occasionally. Now, not in the same way that I used to. So December 2021, 22, 23, 24, no, 2021. Oh, it was over 3 years, actually. I thought it was less. Yeah, so it ended up being 3 years in total. Yeah.
That's pretty good work. Yeah, like I think we've spoken about before, like it's not the substance or the addictive behavior that's the problem, it's the relationship to it, right? So how are you using that? There's nothing wrong with having a beer at night. Like I'm not one of those people that just like is a sobriety advocate that like everyone has to be sober, like, but it's how you use that substance and if you genuinely are going through a period of your life where you are turning to the drink, for example, to escape emotions or whatever, then obviously, yeah, that's an issue, right? But there's nothing wrong with having a glass of wine with a steak. So I think we're actually quite aligned with our beliefs around the sobriety path and the 12 steps and stuff. That's probably a conversation for a different day.
Oh yeah, we could fill an hour with that easy.
I know, and I speak to so many people that go through the 12 steps and stuff, and this whole powerlessness and surrendering to the substance and all of this stuff, and you're in recovery for the rest of your life, and it's really not the case. It's really not the case.
It's so binary. That's what I always found. I found it so limiting and restrictive. You're either an addict or you're in recovery. When is my opportunity to be a human again? When can I just be recovered and look back on that chapter of my life and learn from it, as opposed to staying in a perpetual cycle of potential relapse or sobriety? It's like you just get forced into these different containers, which,
Fear, isn't it?
yeah, it is. It is.
Scaremongering.
Yeah, yeah,
Like, yeah, we could easily say that. Like you like, there's this possibility of this, that, this, but you're healed, you're good, go and enjoy your life. You
yeah.
don't need to be in this process for the rest of your life doing five. I spoke to my friend and he said that he went to an AA meeting and like he had to commit to like 5 hours a week, and they gave him like tons of homework, and like he had to leave work early, and he had to like ring five people a day like to tell them that he's okay. And he was like, I was spending more time fucking thinking about the substances and actually getting on with my life because I had to do all this, ring someone to let them know how you're feeling, and all of this stuff. And it's just, it keeps you hooked.
Mm,
It keeps you hooked in that cycle.
mm.
And yeah, it's tough. It's
It's
tough.
interesting. I can remember when, like I said, I decided to have a beer August last year, and I posted about that. Bearing in mind the platform that I post on is LinkedIn. When I shared that update to say, I've decided to have a beer, here's my thought process, explains why I wanted to do it, and the reason why I wanted to do it was to essentially prove to myself that I could have a beer and not completely fuck my life up. Like it was an experiment. It's like I have a hypothesis. I feel like I'm actually in a really grounded place now, and I'm happy with who I am, and I love myself, and I think that actually I can do this, and therefore I will. I got so much pushback from
Imagine.
the community, and bearing in mind I was on the edge of transitioning out of addiction work at that point, but the response that I got was, "How dare you do that? This is such an irresponsible decision for someone in your position to make. What kind of an example do you feel like you're setting for your clients here?" The exact example that I want to. This is what I want people to feel like they can do. I'm never going to be in a position where my clients have to commit to lifelong sobriety. What I want them to do is to feel empowered to make their own decision. If they get through, in my case, being realistic, it was 3+ years before I was able to make this decision. Like, it wasn't an overnight, 10 days in and out rehab job or whatever, and then decide, yeah, I can probably go back to alcohol. No, there was 3+ years, hundreds of hours of therapy and coaching, and numerous internal conversations and justifications and dialogues that I'd had with myself before being able to arrive at that place of competence to make that decision. I'm fine to make this decision. And if my clients did the same thing, I'd be fucking proud of them, honestly. But it was just so interesting as a social experiment to see. That is a very, in my opinion, binary and overly dramatized way of looking at what is a very complex and nuanced problem, which
Yeah,
autonomy.
and let me guess, they were probably all in the 12 steps or rehab kind of
From
society,
that
as
from
it
that
were.
world, yeah, from that
Yeah.
world, it's not always 12 steps, but it's that the old school ideological approach of addiction, which is, on one side addiction, on the other side recovery. It's that world, which does all stem from the AA methodology. Yeah.
It's interesting because I never really saw myself as like, I don't know. It's sometimes when you're kind of in your own lane, I've got the blinkers on so much. I don't really pay attention to like other addiction coaches' posts or whatever. And then, like having conversations like this or going on that other podcast last week, I actually like reflected and I was like, fuck, like I do actually have a bit of a different approach here. Like so many people are in this kind of box,
Mm.
and they're in this like that way, that old way, right? And it's so nice to be able to step out of that box and actually have a refreshing opinion or point of view on it, rather than you are an. I don't even like the word addict, to be honest. I don't even really like calling myself an addiction coach. I'm really trying to think about another word that I can use to articulate how essentially how I do what I do, because I don't really agree with the word addict, to be honest.
Yeah, Gabor Mate, like incredible guy. he was one of the first people to challenge that world. I think he's still very much involved in the 12-step community, and he's still doing great work, but his whole philosophy is around self-inquiry, compassionate self-inquiry, I think he calls it. And he had this phrase which, when I was going through my journey of healing, really stuck with me. And the question that he posed was, we shouldn't be asking why the addiction, we should be asking why the pain. And that is what I think the old school, old way approaches miss. Because, as I'm sure you have experienced yourself, when I was doing that work, a lot of people would come to me after they'd been through that world. And you know what was really interesting? A lot of the time, I remember this one guy which I worked with, he'd been through that world, and he still went to meetings when I met him. And he was sober, and he had been for over 2 years. He said, I'm fucking miserable, Dan. I'm sad. I'm unhappy. Why? What's going on? Well, it's that same quote. Unprocessed emotion gets buried alive, brother. You might be sober, but this is just evidence of the fact that it's not about that, is it? That's one part of it. That's a big part of it. But doesn't mean to say that by removing that, you will feel complete and whole as a human being, because it goes beyond that.
It does.
Mm.
It does.
Mm.
And yeah, you see it so often with people going to rehab and stuff like that. And actually, this addictive personality that people experience, as you and I both know, is not really a thing. It's more of a dysregulated nervous system, right? And this nervous system is latching onto these other vices and other behaviors and stuff. And I heard a story from someone once, and they went to like a 12-step meeting, and everyone's like going outside for like fag breaks, or like they walk in with like these energy drinks, or like I don't know, vapes and all this stuff. So they've just replaced one thing with another. And I see it so often. Like, they stop cocaine, but then they smoke weed every day. Or like, they stop weed, but then they drink, or I don't know, whatever. But I actually worked with someone that was an alcoholic. He literally just stopped, like, completely. And as you and I both know, that emotion is still obviously living within the body, right? And he ended up he was addicted to caffeine. He was having like five large Starbucks a day, sugar and all of this stuff. And it was only until we did the internal work and understood, where does this come from? And he was in his 50s, I think, or late 40s. And this came from childhood. He was 4, 5, 6 years old.
Mm.
And it was the little boy that was screaming for this love and attention and stuff that he didn't have, essentially. So yeah, there's so much evidence there to suggest that actually you need to do the work.
Yeah,
Really.
definitely. I do think the tide is turning. It's just slow. I remember middle of last year, well, all of last year actually, I made a real effort to try and find other folks who were doing it in a similar way to me. And I know there's a company in South Africa who is a rehab center. They've got a few different branches. They're starting to do more in the UK, and like the founder of that business is well aware that it takes more than just removing the substance and behavior. I know there's another place in UK called Windermere or something like that. And I'm only sharing this because, you know, as a therapist, there are some people who are actually beyond the work that we're able to deliver. Like, some people I think do actually need to go through a clinically supervised detoxification program. But if they're only removing the thing and not actually supporting that individual heal whatever the wounding is beneath the surface at an emotional level, then the problem will come back. So I say this because there are people out there who see that it's about more than just the substance or behavior. But when you think that the AA methodology has been around for over 100 years, at this point, it's going to take a while to work through that and challenge the narrative, because it's so deeply entrenched into the collective psyche. You know, if you ask, I'd say like 80-90% of people, you go and ask them, what's the solution to addiction? Most of them are going to say AA or CA or something like that. It's just so deeply embedded into our culture that it will take a while. But, you know, especially with AI and like access to the information that people have now, it will accelerate, which is great, because people need to be more aware of what the reality of the situation is, and very grateful to see that it is changing over time. You know, it's folks like you sharing your message and putting this information out there that does change the tide of the collective psyche over time. Just keep doing what you're doing, mate. Keep shouting.
Show from the mountains, mate.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, there's this one quote stuck out to me that I heard before, and it was like, the addiction isn't the problem, it's a solution to the problem. The problem itself is actually the discomfort that someone's trying to avoid, and that's where the magic happens. And yeah, you're totally right. Like people that drink liters, like I don't know, say a liter of spirit every day or whatever, they are out of our realm, right? They need to go on a safe detox. So yeah, for anyone listening that may be in that position, then check out those places that Dan recommended.
Yeah, yeah. In the UK, definitely Windermere. They're doing a lot of really really good work.
Yeah, yeah, nice man, nice. Well, like what the work that we did, I suppose. Like, I just want to touch on that a little bit. I appreciate your. It's about 2.5 years ago, and I know you're probably not going to remember everything. That was quite some time ago now. But like, what? Because essentially, I remember session 2, I didn't touch a substance. I haven't touched a substance since. I'm completely sober from. It's a choice to not drink. I genuinely do not want to drink. Like, if I want to drink, I will, but it's just a choice that I don't really value alcohol in my life, to be honest. So since then, that session, I haven't touched anything, and it's been like 2.5 years now, right? So the work that we did stuck, and you were actually in my corner for only up until 3, 4, 5 months ago, right? So we were working together for a good 2 years solidly, really. And this is why I wanted to get you on, because you've been such a figure in my life and role model, really. And so I just want to thank you for that. But for the process that you kind of took me through, for anyone that's listening, that's like, right, how did Jake and Dan achieve 2.5 years sobriety from this online hypnotherapy stuff that you're talking about? Yeah. Like, what was the process that you kind of took me through? Because I'd also like to hear, I kind of know the process from my perspective, but I'd like to hear it from your perspective, really. Like, what was the framework or loose kind of structure that you followed that got me from drinking, doing drugs every day, working a job that I hated, to sobriety, living a life that I absolutely adore, and ultimately experiencing so much joy as well?
I said this before we actually hit record. You're testing a lot of my memory here.
No, I know, and that's
Technically,
why I said, yeah.
technically, I honestly can't remember, but there's like a macro and there's like a micro, isn't there? The macro is what I can speak to because it's a pretty universal truth. The micro is the technical integration of work we did, which I can't remember without looking
I
back at
don't
my
expect you
client
to.
notes. But the macro is very simple. The macro is eliminate the things that are preventing you from becoming the best version of yourself. In your case, it was whatever you were taking at the time. And then beyond that, it's purpose. It's having a reason to stay on that path. And the reason we started working together was because you wanted to become a mental performance coach, and that then led you on to train as a therapist and do all of the work that you've done up until this point in addiction and whatever else that you've done. So the macro process was eliminate the things that are getting in the way of growth and self-development. When they are removed, it gives you an opening into that person, in your case's internal world, so that we can understand, okay, well, what was causing you to default to go back to whatever those behaviors or destructive patterns were. And then over the long term, it's finding something that lights a fire inside you and excites you enough so that that old way of being is no longer an option. And that's the secret to longevity, to keep doing it for as long as you have. And as you've said just a moment ago, not want alcohol, because it's a balancing game a lot of the time. If you've got like destructively drink alcohol or not, well, the or not needs to be compelling. There needs to be something that really, really lights you up inside for you to decide, that's going to be the better option. So that's the purpose piece. And in your case, the purpose piece was, yeah, training as a therapist, building your own business, more recently, traveling around the world, having beautiful moments and experiences. So hopefully that answers your question. Maybe we'll have to do another one while I pull up client notes and we'll go deeper into the actual processes
No,
that you
no,
followed.
it's cool. I don't expect you to know my client notes from 2.5 years ago, but I just yeah, macro answer was perfect really because yeah, I obviously I follow a 3-step process which is kind of similar, but the two biggest factors that I would say that I agree with, well, I agree with the whole thing, but the two biggest things that stick out is the emotional content and the purpose. Like we worked through the shit, but then I found something that I could never, ever, ever slip up on. I just physically cannot afford to go and get fucked up tonight. Even if I wanted to, or even if I needed to, I can't. I've got people that depend on me, that I serve and that I lead, right? And it's so important to have a purpose bigger than you, right? And that's what we do as coaches. It's like life is too precious to throw away.
Mm.
And we love our life so much that we wouldn't ever want to do that.
Mm.
Really good book on that for anyone that's listening is the Ikigai. I'm sure you've read that, Dan.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic book about finding purpose and meaning, and also Man's Search for Meaning. That's a deep existential book too.
Yeah, start with Ikigai and
Yeah,
then get the full hog, Man Search for Meaning. But it's one of the most powerful books I've ever read.
it is. But what's the quote? He who has a purpose or he who has a meaning can almost bear any how. Right?
Yeah, almost. He who has a why can bear it almost anyhow.
There you go. Yeah. So like when you have something so deep within you, like the why, you can essentially get through anything.
The world is yours.
Yeah. It is, man. It is. Well, I know you're tight for time, so I'll wrap this up. But is there anything that you feel like we've missed that you maybe wanted to share, or any advice that you would have for someone that is maybe at that air quotes rock bottom that you potentially were quite a few years ago now, or that's struggling and listening to this, kind of knowing that something needs to change, but just not quite sure how or what to do?
Good question. Well, it's a good frame actually, because a lot of the time when I was coming to the end of my struggles, I didn't actually know what to do. Unconsciously, I knew I had to do something, but I didn't know what that thing was. If there is somebody who's listening back to this who knows that the way they are doing things right now is destructive and often leads to self-sabotage, then anything you do differently will likely be better than the way that you are doing things right now. So if there is somebody who's listening back to this, just do something differently, whether that's, speaking to yourself in the mirror differently, speaking to your friends slightly differently, big deep, reaching out to someone who you know that can help you, whether that's, Jake or whoever. Just be honest with yourself. I think that's the biggest the biggest light bulb moment for many folks who are going through struggles with addiction. There's just a lack of self-honesty that's there, and we do know what the better choice is a lot of the time. And if you are just honest with yourself and make one tiny little change every day, over time, it makes a big difference.
Cool. Thanks for sharing, mate. And I just want to say on record, really, like, thanks for the work that you've done with me too, because I 1,000,000%, actually, no, I maybe would have been where I am today, but I don't know what that path would have looked like. And I remember our first call and I was like, Dan, how do you do what you do? And we went through the process. You pointed me in the direction of the cognitive hypnotherapy that we're both qualified in. So yeah, I just want to say thank you for being the figure and the role model in my life for the last 2+ years. So I can't thank you enough, mate.
My pleasure, bro. It's good to see you winning.
Thanks, brother. Cool. Where can people find you? Maybe I believe you work with therapists and stuff now, right? So maybe there are some therapists in my world that are listening that maybe want to reach out, or some people just want to check out your work and stuff. So yeah, where can people find you, mate?
Best place to go is probably YouTube. I am on LinkedIn as my main social media platform, but I recognize that not everybody is. So I recently launched a YouTube channel, and it gives people an opportunity to hang out with me for a longer period of time. If somebody's going to sit through, what have we been on here for? 45 minutes, an hour, chances are they're probably a fan of longer form content. So yeah, I'd head to YouTube with Dan Martin is my handle over there. I'd love to see people connect.
Cool. I'll drop the link in the description anyway, mate.
Awesome, bro. Thank you.
Nice
Been
one.
really good to be on. It's good to see you fleshing out your own ideas and standing in your truth. It's very cool, man.
Thanks for coming on, brother. Appreciate it.
Nice one.
Cheers, mate.